She was shivering alone at a bus stop in the pouring rain. He gave her his jacket, without knowing she was the most powerful woman in global health. But what started as a simple act of kindness would uncover a deadly betrayal, a billion-dollar scandal, and a secret that could destroy them both. Who was she really? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The sky over Los Angeles cracked open with thunder, spilling a cold, relentless rain over the empty streets. It wasn't the kind of night anyone chose to be outside. It was the kind of storm that made even the freeways look abandoned, as if the whole city had ducked for cover. Keanu Reeves leaned forward on his vintage Norton motorcycle, the engine humming beneath him, struggling against the wind. He was soaked to the bone, his gloves heavy with water, his breath fogging against the inside of his helmet. The late-night meeting had gone longer than expected, and instead of taking the usual route home, he'd veered off toward side roads for some rare silence. But this storm wasn't giving him peace. It was demanding something else. He turned down a quiet street in Koreatown just as the engine hiccuped. The hum dropped to a stutter, then another. Keanu's eyes narrowed behind his visor. The bike gave one last rumble, then died. Just like that, dead in the water. He coasted to the curb and let it roll to a stop under a flickering streetlight. He climbed off and stood beside it, pulling off his helmet with one hand, slicking his wet hair back with the other. The rain came down harder now. He looked up at the sky for a moment and gave a dry laugh. Of course, he muttered to himself. No shops open, no traffic, not even a passing cab. He reached into his pocket for his phone, but there was no signal, just an empty bar and a black cloud above him. As he tucked it away, a small movement caught the corner of his eye. Across the street, half-domed under the broken light of an old bus stop sign, someone was sitting on the metal bench. He squinted. At first, he wasn't sure it was a person. It looked like a bundle of shadows. But the longer he stared, the clearer it became. It was a woman, sitting alone in the rain. Her legs pulled up slightly, her arms hugging herself tight. She wore a black business suit that clung to her from the rain, and her heels were scuffed and sinking into a growing puddle. Her hair was dripping, sticking to her pale cheeks. She looked like she hadn't moved in hours. Or maybe she couldn't. Something twisted in Keanu's chest. He reached back into the side compartment of his bike and pulled out his leather riding jacket. It was thick, lined, and still dry on the inside. Without hesitation, he stepped into the street, his boots splashing through the flooded gutter as he made his way toward her. She didn't look up as he approached. "Excuse me," Keanu said softly, slowing a few feet in front of the bench. "Are you all right?" The woman finally lifted her head. Her eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with exhaustion and something deeper, something like fear. Water streamed down her face, but she didn't wipe it away. Her lips were trembling, more from cold than shock, though her expression said she hadn't expected anyone to stop, much less speak. She opened her mouth to answer, but her voice caught, brittle and weak. "I'm fine," she managed, though her voice shook more than her body did. Keanu stepped forward, slowly, crouching to her level. He offered the jacket. "You're freezing. Please, take this." She blinked at it like it was a hallucination. Her hands, pale and trembling, didn't move. She looked up at him with confusion, as though trying to figure out what kind of person walks through a storm to help a stranger. I can't take that," she whispered. "You'll get sick." "I've got more jackets," Keanu said with a gentle smile. "But you look like you've run out of nights like this." Her eyes softened. Slowly, hesitantly, she reached out and took the jacket. Her fingers grazed his for a moment. Cold, delicate, like they hadn't held anything warm in hours. She pulled the coat around her shoulders and immediately closed her eyes. A small breath escaped her lips, somewhere between relief and disbelief. "Thank you," she murmured. "Really, you didn't have to stop." Keanu stayed crouched. "You looked like you needed someone too." There was a long silence between them, the kind that was louder than words. Rain tapped on the bus stop roof. The wind whistled through the alley behind them, and the city carried on somewhere far away, unaware of the quiet moment unfolding under a broken streetlight. "What's your name?" he asked gently. She hesitated. The pause was almost imperceptible, but it was there, a flicker of calculation in her eyes. Then she gave him a smile, small and polite. "Lena," she said. Keanu nodded. "Lena, I'm Keanu." A flash of recognition passed through her expression. "Not much, just a moment." But she didn't say anything about it, didn't ask for a photo, didn't even acknowledge the name. He respected that. "I'd offer you a ride," he added, glancing toward his dead bike. "But I'm stranded myself." She let out a short laugh, surprised by herself for laughing at all. "Well, we make quite the pair," she said, still clinging to the jacket like it might disappear if she let go. "Both caught in the rain, no backup plan." Keanu stood up slowly, eyes scanning the street. Still no sign of a bus. No cars. No life. "You sure you don't want to call someone? I've got my phone." "When it decides to work." She shook her head. "No, there's no one to call tonight." Keanu stood quietly for a moment, letting her words settle. There was something in her tone, flat, controlled, yet filled with invisible weight. The way she said "no one" wasn't casual. It was deliberate, measured, like she'd made a choice long before he'd arrived. He reached into his back pocket and pulled out a folded paper napkin. It was from the diner he'd stopped at earlier that night, tucked beside the receipt. With one hand shielding the napkin from the rain, he scribbled something on it with a small pen he always carried. Then he stepped forward and held it out. "This is my number," he said, "in case the bus never comes, or if you need anything later, a ride, a warm place, just anything." Lena looked at the napkin like it was a lifeline. Her hand moved slowly as she took it, pressing it between her palms as though the warmth from his handwriting might transfer through the paper. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, voice barely audible over the storm. "You don't even know me." Keanu tilted his head slightly, looking at her with something that resembled understanding more than sympathy. "Maybe that's why," he said, "because not knowing you means I don't expect anything. I just saw someone cold, and I wanted to help." She didn't respond right away, just stared down at the napkin, then back up at him. Her eyes were no longer just tired. They were glassy with the hint of tears she refused to let fall. "I haven't had someone say something like that in a long time," she said quietly. "You don't have to say anything now," he replied. "Just promise me one thing." She waited, curious. "If the rain keeps coming and you still don't know where to go, call me." Lena nodded once, not a dramatic gesture, not a tearful collapse, just a slow, trembling nod. Keanu gave her a final look, soft and steady. Then he turned, walking back through the rain toward his silent motorcycle. As he reached it, he glanced over his shoulder. Essie, she was still sitting there, smaller now under the weight of his jacket, her arms tucked tightly around herself. She clutched the napkin like it might vanish with the wind. He didn't know the truth. He didn't know she wasn't just some lost woman at a bus stop. He didn't know her real name was Dr. Lena Santos, or that she had disappeared from the world stage after exposing corruption at the highest levels of global health. He didn't know there were people searching for her, people who would stop at nothing to silence her. All he saw was a stranger who needed help. And for Keanu Reeves, that was enough. The motel room was small, barely more than a box, with peeling wallpaper and a humming mini-fridge. But to Lena Santos, it felt like the last safe corner of a collapsing world. She sat motionless on the edge of the bed, her feet bare, still damp from the storm. The television screen was off, its black glass reflecting her face in pieces. Her hair hung limp against her cheeks. Keanu's jacket, warm and heavy, draped around her shoulders like a shield she hadn't known she needed. Her name wasn't really Lena. It was Dr. Lena Isabel Santos, Director General of the World Health Organization, one of the youngest ever appointed. A public figure, yes, but not the kind who chased fame. She was known for rolling up her sleeves in field hospitals, sitting cross-legged with children in clinics, confronting politicians with hard truths, and never backing down from pressure. Until now. Hours earlier, she had escaped from her own estate. Escaped, not left. That distinction mattered. What had once been a home filled with global briefings, strategy sessions, and quiet dinners with the man she loved had turned into a prison. And that man, Dr. Victor Helm, celebrated humanitarian, global health strategist, and her fiancé, had turned out to be something far darker. She glanced at her reflection again, barely recognizing herself. No makeup, no heels, no staff. Just a woman who had seen the inside of betrayal and was now hiding in a budget motel with $23 in her clutch and a napkin bearing a stranger's phone number. Her hands tightened around the fabric of Keanu's jacket. He didn't know who she was. When he looked at her on that bench, he didn't see headlines or power. He just saw someone cold, someone alone. He gave her warmth without question, and for some reason, that had hit harder than anything else today. Her mind replayed it all, the exact moment her world cracked open. She had been reviewing reports on a potential malaria breakthrough when a flagged document appeared in her encrypted inbox. It wasn't from her usual team. The sender's name was unfamiliar, but the data was internal, deeply so. Not just research findings, not just clinical outcomes. It included emails, call logs, and altered timestamps. And in all of them, Victor's name kept appearing. She had stared at the screen for nearly an hour, unable to breathe. These weren't minor mistakes or protocol violations. This was organized, deliberate, and damning. WHO data had been quietly diverted to private pharmaceutical partners, ones currently bidding on global health contracts. Data meant to save lives was being leveraged for profit, and Victor, the man she trusted most, was at the center of it. Lena had confronted Victor just before sunset, inside the high-section compound they shared in Geneva. He was in his usual spot on the terrace, sipping espresso, overlooking the lake like nothing in the world could touch him. She held the printed documents in her hands, the proof shaking slightly from the rage coursing through her body. "You lied to me," she said, her voice calm but cold. "You've been leaking confidential research to private drug firms. These are your signatures, Victor." He looked up at her with that careful expression he always used when caught off guard. Measured, still, eyes calculating behind a practiced smile. "You've been under a lot of stress lately, Lena," he said. "You might be misreading things." She slapped the pages down on the glass table between them. "Don't patronize me. I've read every word. I've seen the payment routes, the shell companies. You've been undermining the global rollout of treatments, sabotaging affordable access, just to boost stock prices." He took a slow sip of coffee, then stood. "It's more complicated than that. You think this organization survives without compromise, without alliances? You're naive." Lena stared at him. This wasn't a conversation, it was a line drawn in stone. He wasn't denying it. He didn't even seem afraid. "You could have killed people, Victor. You probably already have." He stepped closer. "We've all made decisions that affect lives. You just don't want to admit that yours were used too. You signed off on half these programs." "Because I trusted you," she snapped. "Because I believed in us." He nodded slowly. "And that was your mistake." In that moment, her vision blurred. Her legs wobbled. She reached for the back of the chair to steady herself, the world tilting around her. What did you do to me?" she whispered, her knees buckling. Victor caught her before she fell, guiding her gently like a lover helping someone exhausted. But his touch was too smooth, too practiced. "You're tired," he said. "You need sleep." She tried to protest, but the words stuck in her throat. Her limbs grew heavy, her eyelids leaden. He walked her up the marble staircase like nothing was wrong. As she collapsed onto the bed, she heard the lock click behind her. The room spun, her mouth went dry. She tried to lift her arm to push herself up, but her body wouldn't respond. Then, blackness. She didn't know how many hours passed, but when she woke, the sky outside was orange. Her throat burned. Her shoes were gone, her purse and phone missing, and the door was locked from the outside. That's when the panic hit, not loud, not frantic. It was cold, controlled. And it was the moment she stopped being Dr. Lena Santos, Director General. She was now just Lena, the woman who had to escape before she disappeared forever. The lock was older than the rest of the estate's high-tech security systems, a leftover from when the room had been just a guest suite. Lena had spent part of her childhood fixing broken door latches in her mother's tiny flat in Recife. Her fingers remembered what her mind barely had time to think through. A slim plastic ID card tucked inside her emergency stash was all she needed. She slid it carefully between the door and the frame, finding the sweet spot. With a faint click, the bolt gave way. She didn't hesitate. She moved barefoot, careful not to make a sound. Down the hallway, past the modern art Victor had insisted made their home feel grounded. The irony stung. Nothing about the place was grounded anymore. It was a house built on lies. In a closet tucked beside the kitchen, she found her backup emergency kit, intended for natural disasters, ironically. A small wad of cash, a pair of flats, a coat that smelled faintly of cedar. No phone, nothing digital. She couldn't risk being tracked. She slipped out the back door just as headlights flashed at the front gate. Someone was coming. She ducked into the hedges and ran. No plan, no destination. Just away. She made it 3 miles on foot before her lungs began to fail her. A gas station clerk gave her a wary glance but said nothing. She bought a bottled water and used the restroom to wash the blood from a scrape on her knee. Then she spotted the local city bus pulling into a stop across the street. She crossed without thinking, waved weakly to the driver. He led her on, without a fare. She sat near the rear, shivering under a thin coat, her mind blank except for one repeating thought. She couldn't go to the authorities. Not yet. Not with Victor still inside the system. If he could sedate her, silence her, lock her away in their home, then he could erase her completely from the public record. She needed time, proof, safety. The bus moved slowly through unfamiliar neighborhoods. She had no idea where to get off, but when it stopped near a side road with a flickering streetlight, she stepped down. She walked until she found the bench, sat, waited. She didn't know if she was praying for someone to notice or to stay invisible. And then, of all people, he walked into her storm. Keanu Reeves. He didn't ask who she was, didn't demand her credentials or doubt her story. He offered warmth without suspicion, help without agenda, a moment of genuine human grace when her entire world had just unraveled. Now, hours later, she sat wrapped in his jacket, staring at the napkin he'd left her. His phone number was scrawled in the corner, ink smudged by her damp hands. She didn't call it yet, but she knew one thing for certain. It was the first real lifeline she'd been offered in days. The motel room smelled faintly of mildew and leftover cigarette smoke, despite the no smoking sign near the door. The heating unit clicked and whirred unevenly, pumping lukewarm air into the quiet space. Lena lay on her side, fully clothed, wrapped tightly in the motel's scratchy blanket and Keanu's jacket layered over it. Her body had finally stopped shivering, but her mind remained wide awake. She had barely slept. Every time her eyes drifted shut, her thoughts yanked her back to Victor's voice, to the locked door, to the words she'd overheard through the vent, words she could never unhear. Words that meant her career, and maybe even her life, had become a target. But in this moment of stillness, another memory surfaced, one she hadn't thought about in years. It began as a flicker of recognition, a strange echo in the way Keanu had spoken to her at the bus stop. Not just what he said, but how he said it. Calm, present, no performance, just truth. That voice had stirred something familiar. She sat up slowly and reached for the small tote bag she'd taken from the estate. In it, alongside her emergency cash and ID card, was a crumpled folder of old newspaper clippings and notes. Pages she had stashed away over the years, not for work, but for herself. Personal inspiration. Anchors from moments that had shifted her purpose. She found it near the bottom, a glossy printed program from the Global Humanity Summit in New York, 11 years ago. She'd attended as a regional health officer then, new to global discussions, barely known outside of Brazil. She remembered feeling like an imposter in that room filled with ambassadors, scholars, and billionaires. But what had surprised her most was when they announced a special guest keynote. A Hollywood actor of all people, Keanu Reeves. At the time, she'd been skeptical. Another celebrity photo op, she'd thought. But then he spoke. And it hadn't been a speech. It was a reflection, honest, measured, delivered without notes, without grandstanding. He had spoken about dignity, how it didn't depend on money or recognition, but on how we treat one another in the quiet moments when no one is watching. He talked about a nurse who once gave him tea in a hospital waiting room when he was just a scared young man, waiting to hear about a loved one's fate. He said that simple act had stayed with him more than all the movie premieres and accolades combined. That speech had changed something in Lena. She had been on the fence about joining the WHO's Emergency Response Division at the time. It would mean leaving her post in Brazil, giving up a stable path, and entering a whirlwind of crisis zones, unstable regions, and constant motion. But after Keanu's talk, she'd walked out of that auditorium and accepted the post the next morning. She pulled the chair closer to the motel's tiny desk and laid the napkin flat. His handwriting was slightly uneven, like it had been scrawled quickly. Still, it felt deliberate, personal. She ran her finger over the digits. She didn't dial, not yet. But the moment felt charged, as if the number itself held more than just a line to a phone. It held memory, connection. Lena remembered sitting in the third row during his Geneva speech. She hadn't expected much. Most of the summit was data-heavy, filled with acronyms and global frameworks. But when Keanu took the stage, the room shifted. It wasn't about metrics or policy. It was about people. He spoke softly but with weight, telling a story of a woman he'd met while filming in a war-torn village. She had nothing. No shoes, no running water, no family left. But she'd given him half her bread when she saw him sitting outside during a shoot break. He had never forgotten her. Not because of what she gave, but how she gave it. She looked at me like I wasn't famous, or foreign, or important, he had said. She looked at me like I was human. And I realized that's the dignity most people go a lifetime without receiving. Those words had stayed with Lena longer than she realized. In a world full of rankings, hierarchies, press photos, and strategic partnerships, his message had cut through the noise. It reminded her why she wanted to do this work in the first place. Why she'd left the comfort of early tenure to wade through refugee clinics and unregulated pharma trials. Why she'd endured rooms full of men who underestimated her. Because something in her believed small acts created real change. And now, a decade later, that very same man had handed her his coat at a bus stop. The gravity of it pressed down on her. She wasn't superstitious, but this didn't feel like coincidence. It felt like convergence. Of all the people in Los Angeles, of all the streets she could have wandered down, it had been Keanu. Not a security guard, not a nurse, not a cab driver, or a stranger with good intentions, but him. A man whose words had once helped set her course, and who now, unknowingly, might just help her survive it. She looked down at herself. She was bruised, disoriented, off the grid. Her face, once plastered across diplomatic newsletters, was now pale and puffy in the mirror. She was no longer the commanding leader of WHO. She was a fugitive in hiding. But something about remembering that summit, that moment in Geneva, helped her breathe again. Lena placed the napkin back inside the small drawer beside the bed, folding it carefully as though it were fragile. The jacket he had given her hung over the back of the motel chair, still damp from the night storm. She stared at it for a long while, unsure what emotion was rising. Grief, awe, exhaustion, or something deeper. Was this fate? She had never truly believed in that idea, not in the romanticized way it was often told, but it was hard to ignore how her path kept circling back to one quiet moment from 10 years ago, and the same man who had, without knowing, once helped her find direction, now reappearing when her entire compass had shattered. She let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. Maybe this was her second chance, not just to stay alive, but to remember who she really was. Not the betrayed woman drugged and locked away, not the powerless fugitive in hiding, but the leader who had once walked into war zones, demanded justice at closed-door summits, and refused to bend under the weight of diplomacy's false smiles. Lena stood slowly, stretching the stiffness from her arms. Her body ached, but her mind had sharpened. For the first time since her escape, she wasn't just reacting, she was remembering, reassembling the pieces of herself. She walked to the window. Outside, the street was quiet, just a few cars and the steady beat of morning traffic picking up. The storm had passed. Clouds still hung in the sky, but there was light trying to break through. A new day. She pulled the curtain closed again and sat back down. Keanu Reeves. He had no idea who she was. That was the beauty of it. He didn't help her because she held power. He helped her because he saw someone cold and scared and didn't hesitate. That mattered more than any title or position she'd ever held. She thought back to the way he looked at her. Gentle, but steady. Like he'd met people before who were pretending to be strong when they were quietly breaking inside. Maybe he saw it in her that night, even if he didn't understand why. Lena picked up the room phone, then put it down. She wasn't ready to call him. Not yet. She needed a plan, a path forward. But one thing was clear now. She wasn't as alone as she thought. Somewhere out there, a stranger, with a kind heart, had handed her warmth when she had none left. And maybe, just maybe, the universe had given her one last ally when it counted most. And that thought, fragile as it was, gave her the strength to begin again. The television crackled in the corner of the motel room, its reception fuzzy but just clear enough for Lena to catch the headline that made her heart stop. Reeking. WHO Director General. Missing amid financial probe. Victor Helm speaks out. Her breath caught as her own face appeared on the screen. A photo from 6 months ago. Smiling, confident, wearing the blue scarf she used to favor at global events. Now, the voice of the news anchor layered cold commentary over it. Dr. Lena Santos, previously celebrated for her leadership during several international health crises, has not been seen in public for 4 days. Sources say she abruptly left a private WHO compound in Geneva, prompting concern among colleagues. Her fiancé and fellow health advisor, Dr. Victor Helm, issued a statement this morning. The camera cut to Victor, standing in front of a polished podium. He looked grief-stricken, his brow furrowed with just the right amount of concern. Lena has been under extreme stress for months, he said gently. We're all worried. She's been pushing herself too hard. I fear she may be unwell. Lena's fists clenched around the thin blanket covering her lap. He was setting the narrative. He wasn't just denying the accusations. He was painting her as unstable, a threat to herself. That was the first step in discrediting everything she might say, and he was doing it flawlessly, without anger or visible malice. Just sadness, compassion, a masterclass in manipulation. Her image on the TV was quickly replaced by shots of the WHO compound, a brief clip of her speaking at the UN, and then flashing headlines speculating everything from burnout to mental collapse. She turned off the screen. The silence that followed felt deafening. Outside, the day was bright. Too bright. She hadn't left the room in nearly 2 days, surviving on vending machine snacks and bottled water. She barely had the energy to eat, but hunger was no longer the main problem. It was the erosion of her identity. She wasn't just missing. She was being erased. The napkin still sat on the desk. For hours she had gone back and forth, staring at it, debating, rationalizing. Her instincts told her to trust no one, not after what Victor had done. But the memory of Keanu, his voice, his warmth, his quiet sincerity, kept pulling her back. He had nothing to gain from helping her. He had already helped, once, without needing to know who she was. And now, as the world turned against her, she realized she had no one else to turn to. She picked up the burner phone she'd bought at the corner market. Her fingers trembled. She typed, "This is the woman from the bus stop. Can we talk?" The message hovered on the screen. Lena stared at it, thumb shaking just above the send button. She read it again, changed nothing, then finally tapped. She immediately turned off the screen and dropped the phone onto the mattress, her heart pounding in her chest like it was trying to outrun her thoughts. What if he didn't remember her? What if he thought she was a scammer or ignored it altogether? Worse, what if someone else had gotten to him already? The silence in the room returned. Each minute felt like an hour. She paced, sat, stood, checked the window. Nothing outside but parked cars and the buzz of city life that had somehow continued, indifferent to the chaos tearing through her world. She sat back on the bed and reached for the phone again. The screen lit up with a single new message. "Of course. Are you okay?" Her breath caught. He remembered. No hesitation, no suspicion, just kindness. It was such a simple reply, but to her it felt like a rescue rope thrown down into the darkness. She typed slowly, deliberately, not wanting to say too much over text. "Not really. Can we meet?" The response came in seconds. "There's a small diner in Echo Park, corner of Alvarado and Baxter. Quiet place. I'll be there at 3. Sit in the back booth." Lena stared at the message for a long time. Echo Park. She remembered it faintly from previous work trips to LA. It was close enough to reach on foot, but far enough to feel outside the spotlight. She liked that. She needed that. She stood and checked herself in the bathroom mirror. Her reflection was pale, hollow-eyed, but alert. Her skin was finally regaining color. The bruises around her wrist, where she had struggled with the bedroom door, were still faintly visible, but fading. Her hair was matted from lack of sleep, but she tied it back into a bun. She dabbed water on her cheeks and blinked until her face looked closer to someone she recognized. From the dresser drawer, she pulled out the old flats and jacket she'd escaped with. Her identity had been stripped down to essentials now. No title, no press badge, no institutional armor. Just Lena, and the napkin in her pocket. She took one final look around the motel room. It had sheltered her, but it had also become a prison of stillness and fear. It was time to move, not to run, to reach. Lena stepped out into the Los Angeles afternoon, the sun low but still strong. Her eyes squinted at the brightness after days of hiding in the shadows. The jacket Victor once bought her now felt too tight, too loaded with memory, but she wore it anyway. There was no time to find something else. She kept her head down, walking briskly toward Echo Park with her burner phone clutched tightly in one pocket and Keanu's napkin folded carefully in the other. The sidewalks buzzed with strangers, laughter from a food truck line, the clang of a distant skate park. It all seemed so normal. And that normalcy, that indifference to her crumbling world, helped steady her steps. No one recognized her. No one whispered. She was invisible. and for once, that felt like protection. The diner sat quietly at the corner, just like he said it would. Old signage, faded red booths, a handwritten cash only sign taped to the door. She paused before entering, her hand on the doorframe, heart hammering again. She scanned the windows first. He wasn't there yet. Good. She needed a second to breathe. She slipped inside and walked slowly toward the back. A waitress looked up from the counter but said nothing. Lena slid into the last booth, her back to the wall, so she could see the entrance, just like she used to do during unannounced visits to volatile territories, always watching the exits. Minutes passed. She didn't check the time, just sat still, listening to the low hum of conversation around her, the clink of ceramic mugs, the distant hiss of bacon on a grill. And then the bell above the diner door rang softly. She looked up. There he was, wearing the same dark hoodie from that night, jeans, and a quiet expression that didn't match the Hollywood image she remembered from magazines or red carpet photos. He looked almost exactly as she remembered from the summit. Calm, grounded, present. His eyes scanned the room until they landed on her. They held for a beat. He walked over. No theatrics, no surprise or hesitation. He simply reached the table and gave a soft, almost relieved smile. She returned it with one of her own, though hers trembled. He slid into the booth across from her. Neither of them spoke right away. He didn't ask why she'd vanished. He didn't question her presence in that diner. Instead, after a long pause, he simply said, "Do you want something warm to drink?" Lena exhaled. It wasn't much, but it was everything. She nodded. For the first time in days, she felt the cold start to leave her bones. Not because the danger was gone, but because she wasn't facing it alone anymore. Steam curled from the surface of Lena's tea as she cradled the cup in both hands, the heat soaking slowly into her fingers. The diner was nearly empty except for an elderly couple near the front and a tired-looking man at the counter nursing black coffee. The rain had returned outside, tapping lightly on the windows and casting long streaks down the glass, mirroring the mood that hung between them. Keanu didn't rush her. He didn't pepper her with questions or press for explanations. He simply sat across from her, his hands folded on the table, his presence steady and quiet. It was the kind of silence that made room for truth. Not the awkward kind, but the kind that said, "Take your time. I'm not going anywhere." Lena sipped the tea, letting the warmth settle her. Her voice, when it finally came, was soft. "I didn't expect to reach out to you. I didn't think I'd have to," she said. He gave a small nod. "But you did, so here we are." She smiled faintly at that. It was a gentle way of saying, "You're safe." She looked down at the cup again, tracing the rim with her thumb. "I'm not who you think I am," she said. "I never made any guesses." That answer made her eyes lift to meet his. His face was calm, open, and completely free of judgment. She swallowed hard. "I worked in a very public position for a long time, until a few days ago." Keanu didn't blink. He waited. "There was someone I trusted, someone close, and her voice caught. "He wasn't who I thought he was. I found something I wasn't supposed to, and when I confronted him, he turned it around on me. Made me the problem, locked me away. I'd barely escaped." Keanu exhaled slowly, not out of shock, but in a way that made space for her pain. "Hell," said I was unstable, that I needed rest, that I'd imagined it all. She laughed bitterly, more air than sound. "Now he's gone public. He's telling the world I've had some kind of breakdown." The words left her lips like poison, but they came easier than she expected. Keanu nodded slightly, eyes never leaving hers. "Sounds like a nightmare," he said. At his, "Do you have anyone else?" She shook her head. "I can't trust anyone right now. Every phone I used, every contact. I don't know who's safe." Another sip. The grilled cheese sat untouched between them. Keanu finally spoke again. "Well, I'm here." Lena looked up, searching his face for irony, for caution, for hesitation. There was none. And for the first time in days, something inside her softened. She looked at him for a long moment, then picked up a triangle of the grilled cheese sandwich. The crust was crispy and golden, the cheese just beginning to cool, but it might as well have been a banquet. She hadn't eaten anything real in 2 days. The first bite nearly made her cry. Keanu didn't speak. He waited, not in that expectant, awkward way, just calmly, like someone who knew how to make silence a comfort rather than a burden. His presence across the booth was like an anchor, not heavy, grounding. "I don't know what you must think of me," Lena finally said, brushing crumbs from her lap. He took a sip of his coffee and gently set it back down. "I think you looked cold the other night, and now you look like you've been through hell, but none of that changes who you are." The words hit harder than she expected. She set the sandwich down and pressed a hand to her eyes. "I don't even know who I am right now," she admitted. "I was leading teams, drafting pandemic protocols. Now I'm hiding in a motel room eating gas station almonds." Keanu smiled faintly. "You're surviving, that matters." She looked at him again. He said it so simply, as if survival wasn't shameful, but sacred. "You talk like someone who's had to rebuild before," she said. He shrugged gently. "Life teaches you. If you're lucky, it humbles you too." They fell into a pause again, but this time it was filled with warmth. Outside, the rain softened to a steady whisper. The waitress passed by, refilled their drinks, and left without interrupting. "I keep wondering," Lena said quietly, "why you helped me." Keanu leaned back slightly, folding his hands. "I saw someone who needed help, that's all. No curiosity, no suspicion. Bad strangers helped me when I didn't deserve it. I've had people give me kindness when I didn't ask. I don't think you need a reason to help someone. Sometimes it just feels like the right thing to do." Lena blinked, then looked down again. Her fingers tightened slightly around the napkin still resting under her hand. "I remembered you, she said. "From years ago, a speech you gave at a humanitarian summit in Geneva." Keanu tilted his head, surprised. "You were there?" She nodded slowly. "You talked about dignity, about how people just want to be seen. That moment, it shaped me more than I realized." He was quiet, thoughtful. "You never know what someone might carry from a moment like that," he said after a while. "I'm glad it meant something." He did. She smiled. Not because everything was okay, but because for the first time, something was beginning to feel steady again. The sound of cutlery clinking and soft conversation around them continued, but for Lena, the world had narrowed to this quiet booth and the man sitting across from her. The chaos outside, the lies being broadcast across continents, the face of Victor at that podium, it all faded for a moment. All that remained was this grounded stillness. Keanu leaned forward slightly. "You don't have to tell me everything," he said gently. "Not unless you want to. But if someone's trying to hurt you or make the world believe something false, you don't have to carry that alone." She hesitated, then looked at him with a quiet, guarded vulnerability. "I can't tell you everything, not yet," she said softly. "Not because I don't trust you, but because if I say it out loud, I might break." Keanu nodded without judgment. "Then we don't say it. Not until you're ready." It was the answer she didn't even know she needed. She'd spent so long around people who demanded answers, demanded statements, demanded her to be strong, that the offer to simply not speak, to just exist without pressure, felt like oxygen. She let her hands fall to the table. "I don't know what comes next." "You don't need to," he replied. "You just need to make it to the next day." Lena looked out the rain-streaked window. The sky had grown darker, but there was still light seeping through the gray clouds. Echo Park was quiet, peaceful even. A small reminder that the world, despite its madness, hadn't completely tilted off its axis. "You think I'm crazy for reaching out?" she asked after a moment. "No," Keanu said calmly. "I think it takes courage to reach out. Even to a stranger?" You remembered something good, a moment of light. That's not crazy, that's human. His words settled over her like a blanket. There were no grand declarations, no sudden plans, just a moment of shared truth. A connection not built on fame or identity, but something deeper. Recognition, empathy, a quiet resilience. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a crumpled receipt, then scribbled a name on the back. "If something happens to me," she said, sliding it across the table, "this is the man behind it. His name is Victor Helm." Keanu didn't touch the slip yet. He didn't need to. He just nodded, eyes steady. Okay, that was it. No theatrics, no shock, just acknowledgement, trust. The rain continued to fall, softer now, like the world had taken a breath. For the first time in days, Lena's chest loosened. She still had no idea what tomorrow held, but she wasn't sinking anymore. Not tonight. The rain had stopped by the time they stepped out of the diner. The sky was still heavy with clouds, but the streets shimmered with reflected lamplight. Keanu walked beside Lena in silence, matching her pace. He didn't suggest where to go next, and she didn't ask. They simply walked, slowly, through Echo Park's quiet back streets. Lena pulled the jacket tighter around her. Her body still felt cold from the days of fear, but something inside her had started to thaw. A part of her wanted to keep talking, though the words were still fragile. She glanced over at Keanu and saw that he wasn't looking at her, not pressing, not studying, just present. She took a breath. "You ever trust someone so completely," she began, "that you stop questioning anything they do?" Keanu gave a small nod. "Yeah." And then one day, they look you in the eyes and lie to you so smoothly that you start questioning yourself instead. Another nod. "Yeah." She didn't elaborate, and he didn't ask her to, but she knew he understood. Lena hesitated before continuing. "I worked in a space where integrity mattered more than anything, where people's lives literally depended on truth. And this man, I trusted. He didn't just lie to me. He turned the truth into poison. He weaponized it. And now, I'm the one in hiding." Keanu looked ahead, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he said, "I know what it's like to be surrounded by people who smile to your face and lie behind your back." She looked at him, surprised, not because she didn't believe him, but because his words sounded so familiar to her own thoughts. "I've had people try to use me," he said quietly. "Friends who weren't really friends, agents, producers, even people I thought loved me." There was a pause. "I lost my daughter," he continued, "and then the woman I loved. Both gone, within months of each other. I've done a lot of grieving in silence. It changes you." Lena's breath caught. "I didn't know," she whispered. Keanu gave a small shrug. "Not something I talk about much. But I see it in you. That kind of grief. It leaves a mark." Lena looked down at her hands. "I've never had a family of my own, never made time for it. My work, it became everything. So when someone I trusted turned on me, it wasn't just betrayal. It was losing the closest thing I had to home." She hadn't planned on saying that, but it came out anyway. Keanu stopped walking. They stood beneath a tree whose bare branches reached out like veins into the sky. The sidewalk was slick with water, the air thick with silence. "I'm sorry that happened to you." She nodded, but her throat was tight. They resumed walking, the sound of their shoes soft against the damp pavement. Lena could feel something shifting inside her. She hadn't meant to open up so much, but Keanu made it feel safe. Like the words wouldn't be used against her. Like they could just exist in the space between them without being dissected. Keanu glanced over at her. "It's hard to explain grief to people who haven't lived inside it." Lena gave a small, knowing laugh. They always wanted to make sense, to have a beginning, a middle, and a tidy ending. He nodded. But it doesn't. It's not a story. It's a presence. Sometimes heavy, sometimes quiet. But it's always there. She looked at him, grateful for the way he spoke about pain. Not with drama, just truth. I never wanted to be seen as weak, she said. So I built this shell around myself. I became someone who didn't ask for help, didn't show fear. But when it all fell apart, that strength didn't protect me. It just isolated me. Keanu's voice was gentle. Strength without vulnerability isn't real strength. It's just armor. And armor gets heavy. Lena looked away, blinking quickly. You say things that feel like they were waiting in my chest already. He smiled. Maybe because we've both been carrying the same things. They paused at a small bench beneath a canopy of trees. Without a word, they sat. The park was nearly empty, just the occasional car passing in the distance and the faint rustle of wind in the leaves. Lena turned to face him slightly. Back at that summit in Geneva, I remember watching you speak and thinking, this man has no reason to care as much as he does. You weren't a diplomat. You weren't obligated. But the way you spoke, it was like you'd seen something, lived something that made compassion non-negotiable. Keanu looked out over the quiet park. I think when you lose enough, he said, you stop looking for reasons to be kind, you just become it, because you know how far a little kindness can reach. Lena nodded slowly. That night, you gave me your jacket. I was done. I had nowhere to go, no plan, just fear. And then there you were. I didn't know who you were, Keanu said. Still don't. But it didn't matter. She glanced at him. Part of her wanted to tell him now who she was, what she did, the weight she carried. But something held her back. Not out of shame, but because it felt like this moment wasn't about titles or roles. It was about people. Just two broken people finding warmth in a world that often felt cold. They sat in silence for a while, not needing to fill the air with more words. Lena leaned back on the bench, letting the quiet seep into her. The storm in her chest had settled slightly, replaced by something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace, even if only for a moment. Keanu glanced at her again. Whatever you're running from, I don't need to know the details to believe you. She turned to face him fully, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. You really mean that? I do. You're clearly carrying something big, but pain isn't a confession. It's a human experience. Lena let the words wash over her. She'd been treated like a criminal by people she once trusted. Keanu's willingness to sit beside her without asking her to justify her fear felt radical. I don't know how to thank you, she whispered. You don't have to. She hesitated. But what if I'm putting you in danger? He shrugged gently. Then I'll deal with it. I'd rather be in danger for doing something right than safe for doing nothing. A lump formed in Lena's throat. He didn't even know her full story, and yet here he was, present, grounded, willing to face fallout for a stranger who barely had the strength to stand. She looked down at her hands again. I used to believe the world could be fixed with data, with truth, with the right systems. And now, she gave a sad smile. Now, I'm not sure what I believe, except that people matter more than anything else, and that small kindnesses might be all we really have. Keanu leaned forward slightly. Then, maybe that's not the end of your belief. Maybe it's the beginning. Lena was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, how do you keep going after everything you've lost? Keanu looked down at his hands. Some days I don't. Some days I just do the next right thing, even if I don't believe it matters. And does it? He looked at her. Tonight it did. Lena felt her eyes burn, but she didn't cry. She simply nodded. I still don't know what to do, she admitted. You don't have to know yet, he said. But when you do, you won't be alone. The street lamp flickered above them. A breeze swept through the trees, lifting a few damp leaves from the sidewalk and carrying them into the dark. Lena sat beside Keanu, both of them wrapped in a silence that wasn't empty but full of everything they'd left unsaid. There was still danger, still fear, but for the first time in days, she believed she could face it. And it all started with a jacket at a bus stop. Lena stepped out of the motel's back entrance into the cool evening air, keeping her hood low and her face angled down. She had returned only briefly to gather what little she had, an old backpack, a water bottle, and the napkin with Keanu's number, now folded and worn at the corners. The tension in her shoulders had eased slightly since the night at the diner, but it returned like a crashing wave the moment she noticed the black SUV parked across the street. It wasn't there when she arrived earlier. No plates she could see, windows tinted pitch black, engine running low, too quiet to be idle. Her heart lurched. She turned casually and began walking in the opposite direction, trying not to quicken her pace. She ducked into a liquor store 2 blocks away, pretending to browse, but the SUV crept slowly past the front window. The driver didn't look in. Didn't have to. Lena knew it was them. She could feel it. Victor's reach catching up. She fumbled for her phone and texted only one word to Keanu: "Help." Within minutes, he responded. "Where are you? Stay where it's safe. I'm coming." She sent him the location and remained in the liquor store, heart pounding with every passing minute. The cashier gave her an odd glance as she stood by the chips aisle without moving. She finally bought a bottle of water just to avoid suspicion. 5 minutes later, she saw the motorcycle's headlight cut through the parking lot. Keanu pulled up and motioned for her to get on. She slid behind him without a word, wrapping her arms around his waist. As they sped through the dim side streets of Los Angeles, Lena kept her eyes closed, her head resting lightly against his back. It wasn't just fear now, it was exhaustion. He didn't ask what happened, he didn't press. He only said, "I'm taking you somewhere safe." They rode in silence until the city began to fade into hills. The road grew narrower, the air cleaner. Finally, they reached a small gate hidden by dense hedges. Keanu pressed a keypad and the gate slowly opened to reveal a modest 2-story home nestled into the hillside. Behind it, slightly separated by a stone path and a wall of bamboo, was a small guest house. Lights glowed softly inside. He parked near the edge of the drive and turned to her. "It's quiet here. No one comes unless invited. You can stay in the guest house. It's warm, stocked, and no one will bother you." Lena hesitated. Every instinct told her not to trust anyone too easily. But then she looked at Keanu. Really looked. And saw the same steady calm in his eyes that had been there since the bus stop. She nodded. "Okay." The guest house was simple but beautiful, with wood floors, exposed beams, and a stone fireplace already glowing with a gentle flame. Keanu unlocked the door and stepped aside to let Lena in first. She entered cautiously, her eyes darting across the space. Everything was clean, cozy, and warmly lit. A small kitchenette stood to the left, and a soft armchair faced the fire with a folded blanket draped over its back. She dropped her bag by the door and moved to the hearth, extending her hands toward the warmth. Her fingers were still trembling. Keanu walked in behind her, carrying a folded towel. "There's a clean bathroom through that door. Fresh linens are in the basket. I'll make you something to eat." She turned to him, stunned. "You don't have to do all this." "I know," he replied. "That's why I'm doing it." She smiled faintly. There was no performance in his voice, no expectation, just presence, just care. While Lena showered and changed into the spare sweats and t-shirt Keanu had left folded on the bed, he moved around the main house's kitchen, pulling together ingredients. He didn't overthink it. Just something warm, simple, comforting. Pasta with garlic, olive oil, and a little lemon. By the time she walked barefoot into the main house, hair damp and eyes clearer than before, the food was ready and the table set. She looked around as if trying to absorb it all. The home wasn't lavish, but it was full of peace. Walls lined with books, a few guitars leaned in the corner, a hand-painted photo of a mountain sunset hanging by the window. Lena felt like she had stepped out of her life and into someone else's. "Smells amazing," she said as she sat down. "Old recipe," Keanu said, handing her a plate. "Learned it in Italy, but butchered it ever since." They both laughed, an actual laugh, not the tight, polite kind Lena had been faking for days. It surprised her how easy it felt here, like the tension was finally peeling off her shoulders. As they ate, the silence between them became comfortable, the kind of silence that needed no explanation. Outside, the hills were dark and quiet. The house felt like a hidden world, far from betrayal, headlines, and black SUVs. After dinner, Lena returned to the guest house, but Keanu followed with 2 mugs of tea. They sat by the fire, wrapped in different blankets, facing the flames. She stared into the dancing light and spoke softly. "You know, I can't remember the last time I felt safe." Keanu didn't respond immediately. Then he said, "Sometimes it only takes one person to remind you what that feels like." Lena turned to him, eyes tired but open. "And what if I don't know how to be that person back?" "You don't have to," he said. "Not right away, just rest." The fire crackled as they sat in quiet reflection. Lena held her mug close, not so much for the tea as for the warmth. Every part of her ached, her body, her mind, her spirit. Yet for the first time in days, she wasn't bracing for something terrible to happen. She was just sitting, breathing. She glanced at Keanu across the firelight. The shadows moved across his face in slow waves. There was something rare about him, something deeply human. She had spent years surrounded by polished people with sharpened smiles, but he felt real in a way that was disarming. Disarming and steady. "Why do you do it?" she asked suddenly. He looked over. "Do what?" "Help people like me, strangers. You didn't even hesitate." He stared into the fire for a long moment before answering. "I've been helped in my darkest moments by people who owed me nothing. That stays with you, makes you want to pass it on. And maybe," he paused, "maybe it's my way of healing too." Lena felt something shift in her chest, something that wasn't just gratitude, it was connection. A quiet recognition of 2 souls who had walked through different kinds of fire and somehow found each other at the edge of it. The warmth of the fire softened her features, and her voice dropped. "I'm scared that if I stop moving, everything will catch up to me." Keanu nodded. "Sometimes rest feels like danger when you've been running too long." She met his eyes. "Exactly." He gave her a small smile. "Then just pause. Not stop, just pause." The flames flickered brighter for a moment as the wood settled. Lena sipped her tea and leaned her head back against the chair. Her eyelids felt heavier now. Not from fear, but from relief. The kind of exhaustion that follows release. She didn't want to admit it, but she also didn't want to leave the warmth of this room. The thought of walking back to the guest house felt like letting go of something she hadn't fully received yet. "Would it be strange if I stayed here just a little longer?" she asked. "Not strange at all," Keanu said gently. And so they sat together as the fire burned low. No titles, no secrets, just a man and a woman sharing a quiet space in a chaotic world. The pull between them was subtle but undeniable. Not just physical, but emotional. Something was forming, something fragile and real. Lena knew this night wouldn't erase the threats waiting outside, but in this moment, in this room, with him, she felt something she hadn't in a very long time. Lena woke early each morning, greeted by sunlight that spilled gently across the hardwood floor of the guest house. The rhythm of her life had changed overnight, from carefully curated security schedules and diplomatic meetings to quiet mornings with tea and the sound of hummingbirds outside the window. She didn't know how long she would stay, but something about the air here made her chest loosen a little more each day. Keanu didn't ask questions. Instead, he offered consistency. Every morning, a fresh mug of coffee was left on the porch railing, just warm enough to make her feel remembered. By mid-morning, he was already in the garden, hands deep in soil, coaxing life out of the earth. It didn't matter whether she joined him or not. He never pressed her. But more often than not, she found herself drifting outside, rolling up her sleeves and kneeling beside him in the dirt. They didn't talk much while gardening. It was enough just to exist beside one another. Lena clipped rosemary while Keanu pulled weeds. They exchanged soft smiles instead of small talk. There was peace in the silence, something sacred in the shared quiet. By the third day, Lena brought out a book she had found tucked between two cookbooks in the guest house, a dog-eared copy of East of Eden. She sat on the porch reading aloud while Keanu repotted mint plants nearby. Sometimes he paused his work to listen more closely, then nodded, repeating a phrase she'd just read, under his breath, as if it carried extra weight. It felt like something out of another lifetime. Simple, unhurried, and full of moments that didn't need to lead anywhere. That afternoon, while trimming a lemon tree that had grown wild along the fence, Lena brushed a stray curl from her forehead and laughed, not politely but openly. The laughter startled her. She looked over at Keanu, eyes bright. "I didn't know I still had that in me." "You've got more than you think," he said, gently lowering a branch and tying it into place. They shared meals like they shared space, easily and without pretense. Sometimes they ate on the back steps, other nights at the small kitchen table, with candles lit simply because it felt right. He cooked with what they had: mushrooms, garlic, rice, herbs, and she learned quickly that Keanu's cooking style mirrored his personality: humble, sincere, and always enough to make you feel nourished. One evening, she offered to make something from her own childhood: spiced rice and beans with roasted plantains. They stood side by side in the kitchen as she chopped onions and he peeled bananas, the scent of cumin and lime filling the house. She told him about her mother, a nurse who worked endless shifts in Sao Paulo and still managed to put food on the table. Her eyes misted, but her hands stayed steady. Keanu didn't interrupt. He simply passed her a towel when the steam from the pot fogged her glasses. By the end of the week, they had built something unspoken. Not romance exactly, not yet, but a closeness that neither of them tried to define. A rhythm, a sanctuary. It was late one night when the illusion of safety cracked just a little. They had finished dinner, stuffed peppers and warm bread, and were flipping through streaming options when Keanu suggested a documentary on war-zone medical workers. He hadn't thought twice about it. But within minutes of the opening scene, an aerial shot of a bombed-out hospital, cries in the distance, flashing lights. Lena tensed. Her fingers clenched the edge of the couch cushion and her breathing shallowed. She tried to hide it, but Keanu noticed. By the time the narrator spoke of a doctor being executed for smuggling antibiotics, Lena's hands were trembling. She reached for the remote with shaking fingers and fumbled it. It hit the floor with a loud clack. Keanu picked it up, eyes locked on her. "Lena?" She shook her head, eyes glassy. "Can we turn it off?" He nodded, of course. He muted the television and waited. She turned away, but her body curled inward like she was bracing for a storm. Her voice came out hoarse, barely audible. "I used to walk through clinics like that. I remember the smell, the silence after explosions, and the way we kept going anyway. Because we had to." Keanu said nothing. He just sat beside her, close but not too close, and let the silence open its arms. After a moment, Lena leaned into him. Her shoulder touched his, and the contact was electric. Not in the romantic sense, but in the human one. She clung to it like a lifeline. Her head tilted slightly until it found the soft place near his collarbone. He didn't flinch. He didn't move. She cried again. Slower this time. A quieter grief. Not the sharp stab of panic, but the long, dragging sorrow of someone who had kept too much buried for too long. "I thought I could fix things," she whispered. "I believed in that. And now, the world thinks I ran because I failed." Keanu rested his hand gently on her back. "The truth doesn't need noise to survive." She looked up at him, eyes rimmed with red, lashes wet. "You always speak like you've already been through it." "I've been through enough to know that pain doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just waits." They didn't speak after that. They didn't need to. That night, Lena fell asleep on the couch, her head still resting near Keanu's shoulder. He covered her with a blanket and stayed close, sitting beside her with a book in his lap, unread. He just watched the fire fade. In the days that followed, the bond between them grew deeper. Lena started humming while she worked in the garden. Keanu began leaving small notes on the guest house door, quotes from books, jokes, or simply, "Good morning." But beneath the growing ease, a tension stirred. Keanu had lived long enough to trust his instincts. Something about Lena's past, her silence around certain topics, the way her eyes flickered to the windows whenever a car passed, told him that the full story hadn't yet come to light. She wasn't just a woman running from a bad relationship. There was more, something heavier, something dangerous. And soon, that truth would arrive, whether she was ready or not. The morning began like any other. A pot of black coffee steamed in Keanu's kitchen while birds chirped in the trees beyond the windows. Lena had taken to rising early and spending time on the back porch, wrapped in a soft flannel blanket, letting the quietness of the hillside restore pieces of her she thought were lost. Keanu stood near the stove, flipping pancakes and humming to himself. Then came the knock. It wasn't hurried, but it was firm. 3 sharp raps against the front door. That didn't sound like a neighbor or a delivery. Keanu glanced at the clock. Too early for visitors. He wiped his hands on a dish towel and walked to the door. A man in his late 30s stood on the porch, hair slicked, holding a notepad and a phone. He wore the kind of casual suit that was supposed to look unplanned, but didn't. His eyes scanned the actor with polite calculation. "Mr. Reeves," he said. "Sorry to drop in unannounced. I'm Jonah Prescott, investigative journalist for the World Tribune." Keanu didn't smile. "And?" Prescott held up his hands. "Just a few questions. There's been chatter online, satellite image tags. Sources say a woman matching the description of Dr. Lena Santos was spotted near this area." Keanu's brow furrowed slightly. "Never heard of her." The journalist tilted his head, unconvinced. "You sure?" "The WHO Director General disappeared last week under pretty serious accusations. There's international interest, Mr. Reeves. If she's here, well, it's the kind of story that breaks the internet." Keanu didn't flinch. "There's no one here by that name. I think we're done." Prescott lingered for a second longer, scribbled something in his notebook, and then stepped away. "If anything comes to mind, my number's on the card." He left it on the porch rail and walked back to a waiting car idling at the end of the driveway. Keanu closed the door slowly. His hands stayed on the knob for a beat too long. He didn't go straight to Lena. Instead, he walked outside, circled the house, and checked the view from the ridge. The guest house door was open, and Lena was inside. Kneeling by the bookshelf, sorting through a pile of folded maps and notes. She looked calm, unaware, but Keanu wasn't. He went back inside, poured 2 mugs of coffee, and carried them out to the patio. Lena joined him a few minutes later. She noticed the tension immediately, the way his jaw tightened just slightly as he sipped. "You okay?" she asked, taking the seat beside him. Keanu set his cup down. "We had a visitor this morning, a journalist. Said your name." Lena froze. "Hale thinks you're here," Keanu added, softly. She sat back in her chair, her face drained of color. Her fingers tightened around the mug. "I see." There was a long pause. "I didn't mean to lie to you," she said quietly. Keanu didn't respond right away. He waited. I'm not who I said I was. My name isn't just Lena, it's Dr. Lena Santos. I'm, or was, the Director General of the World Health Organization. Her voice wavered on the word was. Keanu nodded once. Go on. Lena took a deep breath, one hand gripping her coffee as if it might anchor her. I was engaged to a man named Dr. Victor Helm, she said slowly. He worked under me at WHO for years. Brilliant on paper, respected publicly. But a few weeks ago I discovered encrypted files in his office. He was selling confidential research to private pharmaceutical firms. Data that hadn't been peer-reviewed, trials that were still in progress. Keanu didn't move, didn't blink. I confronted him, she continued. He acted like I'd overreacted, said it was a necessary compromise. But I had evidence, emails, financial records, logs. I was ready to bring it to the Internal Ethics Board. Her voice cracked. That night, he drugged me. Keanu's hand slowly curled around the armrest of his chair. I woke up in a locked bedroom on his private estate outside Geneva. No phone, no documents, no way to reach the outside world. He told me I was experiencing a breakdown, that I'd been paranoid for weeks. Gaslighting, textbook style. She paused, blinking hard. I found a way out through a laundry tunnel. I had a few dollars and nothing else. I got to the airport and flew under an alias. Keanu let out a soft breath and ended up on a rainy bench in LA. She nodded. And then you showed up. He sat in silence for a while, eyes fixed on the distance beyond the railing. Lena watched his expression. She expected disbelief, anger, maybe even fear, but Keanu only looked still. You trusted me, he said quietly. That means something. She blinked, confused. You're not mad? He shook his head. You were running for your life, not trying to fool me. You don't owe me anything except the truth, and you just gave it. Lena's shoulders sagged, her body finally releasing a tension it had carried for days. Her eyes filled with tears she didn't wipe away. I thought you'd hate me, she whispered. Keanu offered a small smile. I've met actors who lied to me for years just to get ahead. You gave me the truth the moment it mattered. Breeze moved through the trees. Lena closed her eyes and let it wash over her. Keanu leaned forward. That journalist showing up wasn't random. They're closing in. If Victor's trying to find you, he's probably watching everything. News cycles, social media, maybe even my home. We need to plan. Lena nodded, suddenly composed. I leave tonight. I'll disappear again. Keanu's voice was steady. No, not like that. She looked at him. You're not just a fugitive. You're a whistleblower, he said. And if what you say is true, the world needs to hear it. But on your terms. With safety. With allies. Lena swallowed hard. Do you believe me? Keanu nodded, every word. That night, for the first time since she fled Europe, Lena didn't dream of locked doors or sirens. She dreamed of standing before a microphone, sunlight on her face, Keanu just off stage, watching, waiting, unshaken. The next morning brought the kind of stillness that hangs in the air before a life changes. Lena stood in front of the mirror in Keanu's guest house, brushing her hair into a neat bun. Her eyes looked sharper now, more focused. The fear was still there, buried deep, but something else had begun to bloom in its place. Resolve. Keanu stood outside, phone in hand, speaking quietly to someone on his private contact list. He had connections, not the flashy kind used for red carpets or parties, but people who owed him favors from decades past. People who knew how to move behind the curtain. Lena stepped out, clutching the folder she had carried with her since Geneva. Inside were printouts she had managed to grab before fleeing. Suspicious account transfers, medical trials paused under unclear conditions, digital traces of confidential WHO research redirected to shell companies. She handed it to Keanu silently. He glanced at the cover page. "It's enough to bury him. If we do this," she said softly, "I lose everything I built. The anonymity is over. The whispers become spotlights. They'll question everything, my sanity, my integrity, my loyalty." Keanu looked up at her. "But you'll finally be free." They didn't speak for a moment. The wind moved through the tall hedges along the path. Lena closed her eyes. Then she nodded. "Let's do it." They started with someone Lena trusted, Daria Chen, a tenured journalist at a respected investigative platform known for protecting whistleblowers. Daria had once interviewed Lena for a humanitarian piece 5 years earlier. Lena had admired her sharp mind and zero tolerance for corruption. She knew Daria would listen first and judge later. Keanu used his private satellite phone to reach her directly. He kept it brief. "It's urgent, she's alive, and she has proof." Daria arrived within 24 hours. She wore jeans and a hoodie, her press badge tucked deep into her backpack. She entered through the back trail Keanu had prepared, avoiding the front gate altogether. Lena met her at the garden table, hands folded, eyes steady. No small talk, no stalling. "I'm not asking you to believe me blindly," Lena began, "but I'm asking you to see what I saw." She handed over the folder. Daria took her time. Each page turned with care. As she read, her lips tightened, her brow furrowed. Halfway through, she looked up. "This isn't just data theft. This could have impacted millions. Trials halted, delayed vaccines. This is criminal negligence on a global scale." Lena nodded. "And covered up by one man with far too much access." Daria leaned back. "You understand that publishing this will create a media firestorm. Victor has lawyers, political backers. You'll need protection." Keanu stepped forward. "We'll get it." He had already contacted a whistleblower defense team based in New York, one he had quietly supported after working with them during a human rights documentary years earlier. They specialized in high-risk cases, especially involving multinational organizations. As the sun began to set, Lena sat with Daria and began recounting everything in order: dates, names, passwords. Her voice never wavered, even when her hands did. By nightfall, Daria turned to Keanu. "She's not only credible, she's the only thing standing between this cover-up and accountability." Keanu nodded once. "Then it's time we make a plan." The plan came together quickly, built on urgency and precision. Lena would remain hidden for now, but her voice would not. Daria arranged for an exclusive exposé to be published with accompanying encrypted documents and time-stamped evidence. The files would be leaked to international health watchdogs and advocacy groups the moment the article went live. But before anything went public, Lena needed one more step: validation from a third-party expert. Keanu made a call to Dr. Abraham Collins, a retired infectious disease specialist who once consulted for WHO and had grown disillusioned with the bureaucracy. He lived off-grid in Arizona, but he owed Keanu a favor. 2 days later, a dusty pickup rolled up to Keanu's house. A grizzled man with sun-worn skin and a sharp eye stepped out and nodded at Lena like they already knew each other from across a battlefield. Dr. Collins reviewed the folder in silence for 2 hours in the study. When he emerged, he said just one thing: "He's right, and the fallout will be massive." That night, Lena couldn't sleep. She sat by the fire, knees pulled to her chest, watching the flames shift. Keanu brought her a blanket and sat beside her, quiet and steady. "You can still back out," he said. She shook her head. "Too many people stayed silent. I won't be one of them." They set the publishing time for the following Tuesday, just before sunrise in Geneva. Prime time in New York. As the clock ticked toward the hour, Lena sat at Keanu's desk, a laptop open in front of her. Her fingers hovered over the send button. Daria watched from the side, ready to trigger the release from her secure network. Lena took a breath. She pressed send. In a matter of seconds, the files were live. The first wave hit within minutes. Online forums erupted, hashtags exploded, and media outlets scrambled to confirm the source. Within the hour, Victor's name began trending globally. The headline on Daria's site read, "Who Insider Blows Whistle on Medical Data Scandal? Millions at Risk." By noon, health regulators across Europe were issuing statements of concern. American late-night hosts were already lining up commentary. And Lena's face was everywhere. Keanu watched it unfold from the window, a strange stillness in his expression. Lena stepped back from the screen, her breathing shallow. "There's no going back now." He nodded. "That's what justice feels like." But beneath the storm of headlines, Victor Helm was not idle. That same day, encrypted messages hit international dark web forums, offering payment for any information on Lena's location. Private investigators were suddenly looking into Keanu's recent visitors, and someone was seen parked outside the entrance to the hill road near his property. The battle wasn't over, but the truth was out. And for the first time since she fled across continents in the pouring rain, Lena felt something close to peace. Not safety, not yet, but purpose. She looked at Keanu, his presence calm beside her, and whispered, "Thank you." He didn't say a word. He just nodded. Because he knew what it cost to stand up when the world wanted you to disappear. It started quietly. A single article appeared on an obscure blog that Lena had never heard of before. An anonymous claim that Dr. Lena Santos had a history of psychological instability. At first, it seemed like noise, but within hours, that same blog post was picked up by larger platforms. Then television anchors began using vague language like unverified mental health concerns and allegations from private sources. Lena stared at the screen in disbelief. A news banner scrolled across one of the major networks. Who director faked kidnapping? Anonymous sources suggest psychological breakdown. She stood frozen in the middle of the living room, the echo of that headline ringing in her head. The timing wasn't random. It was tactical. It was Victor. By nightfall, 3 major outlets had released documents, alleged psychiatric evaluations from a clinic in Zurich, claiming Lena had been diagnosed with paranoid delusions, treated and released quietly years ago. The papers looked official, the stamps precise. But Lena knew they were false. She had never stepped foot in that clinic in her life. "This is how he works," she whispered, her voice shaking. "He erases you by discrediting you." Keanu sat on the couch, reading through the online reports. He said nothing at first. Then he looked at her with calm eyes. "He's scared," Keanu said softly. "That's why he's fighting so dirty." But Lena was unraveling. Her hands trembled as she reached for the coffee table. She had risked everything to speak the truth, and now the world was being fed lies so expertly woven that even the most loyal supporters were beginning to doubt her. And then came the official blow. The World Health Organization released a brief public statement. In light of recent allegations and concerns regarding Dr. Lena Santos, we are placing her on temporary suspension while a full investigation is conducted. Lena sank onto the floor, back against the wall. She couldn't breathe. The silence was louder than any scream. "All of it," she whispered. "Everything I worked for. It's all being undone in a day." Keanu walked over slowly and sat beside her on the floor. He didn't try to give her platitudes. He didn't tell her to calm down. He just sat there, the fire casting soft light across the room. After a long stretch of silence, he spoke. 6 words, clear, steady, and quiet. "The truth doesn't need permission to exist." Lena looked at him, tears sliding down her face. "But what if no one believes it?" He reached for her hand. "Then we show them, together." That night, they decided to fight back, not just through documents or hidden leaks. It was time to step into the light. Lena would no longer be a rumor or a file or a blurry image in a news report. She would become a voice, a face, a force. They began preparations for a press conference. The following morning, Keanu made a call to an old friend, a reputable media producer known for covering war zones and humanitarian disasters, someone who valued truth over spectacle. Within hours, a press conference venue was secured, a modest hall near downtown Los Angeles, not glamorous, but accessible. Cameras would be invited, no pre-screened questions, and no corporate spin. Lena sat in the guest house with a notepad, her pen shaking as she tried to organize her thoughts. But Keanu could tell she didn't need a script. She just needed courage, and that, despite everything, she still had, in full. "You don't have to be perfect," Keanu said as he stepped in with fresh tea. "You just have to be honest." She looked up. "But they'll rip me apart. They'll ask questions I can't answer. They'll make me feel like I'm the one who did something wrong." Keanu knelt beside her. "You're not doing this alone. I'll be standing right beside you." The day of the conference arrived. Lena dressed plainly. No makeup, no carefully curated image. She wore a black blouse and gray slacks, her hair pulled back. Keanu arrived in a simple button-down and jeans. No publicist, no entourage. Just two people standing in front of a truth that had nearly been buried. As they stepped into the press room, a dozen camera flashes lit up instantly. Reporters called her name. Some asked aggressive questions, others simply stared. The tension in the room was electric, like everyone was waiting for either a breakdown or a bombshell. Lena stepped up to the microphone. She paused, took a breath, and began. "My name is Dr. Lena Santos. Until last week, I was the Director General of the World Health Organization. I disappeared not because I was unwell, but because I uncovered something that threatened lives, profits, and reputations." She held up a small flash drive. "On here is the evidence I risked my life to protect. Data that shows a criminal misuse of pandemic research. The man responsible, Dr. Victor Helm, was my fiancé. He is the one behind the mental health rumors. He is the one orchestrating this campaign to discredit me." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Camera crews leaned in closer. One reporter yelled out, "Do you have proof those reports were faked?" "I do," she said calmly, "and so do the organizations we've submitted them to." She stepped back, and Keanu stepped forward. "I'm not here as a celebrity," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I'm here because I witnessed the fear, the pain, and the courage it took for this woman to come forward. I've seen firsthand what power does to people, and I've also seen what integrity costs. She doesn't owe anyone an explanation, but she's giving one anyway." When they stepped away from the podium, the room was silent. Then a single journalist started clapping. Another joined. Within seconds, applause echoed through the space. Lena didn't smile. She didn't break down. She just nodded. Because this time, she wasn't hiding. This time, the world had to see her and choose what to believe. The next day, Lena received an invitation from one of the most respected live global news programs, a rare, high-profile interview watched by millions worldwide. The network didn't want a pre-recorded message or carefully curated edits. They wanted Lena, live and unfiltered. It was a risk, but it was also an opportunity. She accepted without hesitation. That evening, in the quiet dressing room behind the studio, Lena sat before a mirror. A makeup artist hovered, but Lena declined anything more than basic powder. She wanted no mask, no gloss, just her. Keanu stood in the corner, arms crossed, watching her through the reflection. "You ready?" he asked gently. She met his eyes in the mirror. "I've never been more ready for anything in my life." The stage was stark. No flashy backdrops, no music, just two chairs and the truth waiting to be told. The host welcomed Lena, not with fluff, but with a respectful nod and a single sentence. "The world is listening." Lena leaned forward and began. I'm here today not to clear my name, but to reveal the truth. A truth that was buried beneath money, power, and fear. She spoke plainly, slowly, her voice steady but not rehearsed. She described how she uncovered irregularities in WHO's research archives, classified documents altered without explanation, funds diverted to private companies, and a pattern of manipulated data during global crises. She explained how her fiancé, Victor Helm, whom she had trusted with her life, had orchestrated a network of backdoor deals, all while using WHO's name and infrastructure to mask it. She detailed how she confronted him, how he had drugged her and locked her away in an estate disguised as a wellness retreat, and how she escaped, barefoot, bruised, terrified. I had two things in my pocket that day, she said, her voice tightening, a handful of cash and a napkin with a stranger's phone number. She turned her head to the side. The camera panned. Keanu sat silently next to her, in full view of the world. No words, just presence. That stranger, Lena continued, was Keanu Reeves, and without asking questions, without needing to know who I was, he gave me his jacket, his number, and later, his protection. Not because I was famous, but because I was cold. The audience in the studio was quiet. Not a single cough, not a single fidget, just full attention. She pulled out a second flash drive. This contains the complete files. Financial records, internal emails, surveillance footage, and research logs, collected with the help of global allies, all authenticated, all real. As of tonight, they will be released to the public. The host asked, "Do you fear retaliation?" Lena nodded. "Of course, but I fear silence more." She ended the segment with a direct appeal, not to governments, but to people. If you've ever been afraid to speak up, know this. The world doesn't change when the powerful allow it. It changes when the forgotten refuse to stay quiet. The host turned to Keanu for a closing thought. He simply said, "Kindness isn't weakness, it's the beginning of everything." The broadcast ended, but something else had just begun. Within hours of the live broadcast, the internet exploded. Clips of Lena's interview spread across every major platform. A 2-minute reel of her story, beginning with the bus stop, showing the napkin, and ending on Keanu's quote, became the most shared video in over a year. News anchors who had once repeated Victor's narrative now scrambled to retract their earlier reports. Suddenly, the world saw Lena not as a missing director with a mental health crisis, but as a courageous whistleblower who risked her life to expose corruption. But what moved people most wasn't just the content of her revelations. It was the image of her sitting beside Keanu Reeves, both of them calm, centered, and real. That single frame, Lena speaking firmly into the microphone, Keanu, seated quietly beside her with his hands clasped, became a symbol. Dozens of major publications printed the image on their covers, with one caption that echoed around the world: "Kindness is power." Hashtags erupted. "Believe Lena," "Kindness is power," "Napkin of hope." World leaders began issuing statements of support. Within 24 hours, the Secretary General of the United Nations tweeted, "No one should have to run for telling the truth. We stand with Dr. Lena Santos." By the following day, 3 European countries and a coalition of global health experts signed a formal petition demanding an independent investigation into Victor Helm and his private network of pharmaceutical lobbyists. And then the real blow landed. Interpol issued an international warrant for Victor's arrest on charges of conspiracy, fraud, and crimes against public health. The FBI followed with a public statement confirming cooperation. His accounts were frozen. His legal team, once smug and confident, refused comment. Lena received a private message from a former colleague inside WHO. "He's panicking. He's trying to flee to a country without extradition. Your evidence. It hit harder than any of us imagined. Lena stared at the message, phone in hand, sitting at the kitchen table in Keanu's guest house. He brought her a cup of coffee, and she showed him the screen. "It's happening," she whispered. "They're finally seeing him." Keanu smiled, just a little. "They're finally seeing you." She looked out the window, watching the early morning fog lift over the trees. The same streets where she had once walked, terrified and invisible, were now watching her story with open eyes. She had turned a single act of cruelty into a wave of accountability. And it had started, not in a government office or a courtroom, but at a quiet bus stop in the rain. "You know what I keep thinking about?" she said softly. Keanu raised his eyebrows. "That night you gave me your jacket. You didn't know who I was. You didn't care. But you saw me." Keanu nodded. "Sometimes that's all someone needs, to be seen." She took a breath. Not to steady herself, but to feel it. The air, the moment, the freedom. Because now the world knew her name for the right reasons. And for the first time in weeks, she wasn't running. She was standing. The news came early one morning, just as the sun touched the edge of the horizon. Victor Helm had been arrested outside a villa in the Swiss Alps. He had been planning to escape via private jet under an alias, but the authorities got to him first. The photo of him in handcuffs, head lowered and hair disheveled, was plastered across international news outlets by noon. The world held its breath. In the days that followed, the charges expanded. Conspiracy to commit fraud, tampering with global health data, wire fraud across borders, and endangering public safety during a health crisis. Several pharmaceutical executives were also placed under investigation. But Victor remained the center. He was the architect, the puppeteer. And now he would face trial. The tribunal was set in The Hague, an international court used only for the most serious crimes. It was historic. Never before had a case so directly tied corruption in global healthcare to crimes of public endangerment. The courtroom was sleek and modern, with walls of glass and steel. Cameras were permitted only outside, but live transcripts would be released daily to the public. On the first day of the proceedings, Lena stepped out of a black car, dressed in a simple navy suit. No bodyguards, no entourage. Just herself and a leather folder held close to her chest. Reporters shouted her name. Some asked about her health, others about her courage. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence was its own kind of power. Inside the chamber, Keanu sat in the front row, wearing a dark gray suit. He had made no public statements about Lena, no interviews, no press, but he was there. Every single day. Lena was called to testify on the third day. The tribunal's lead judge, a woman from Denmark with decades of international law experience, asked the opening question. "Dr. Santos, do you swear to speak the truth?" Lena looked around the courtroom. Her eyes briefly found Keanu's. He gave a small nod. Just once. "I do." She began not with technical jargon or data charts, but with a story. "I joined the WHO because I believed in protecting lives, not interests. I believed that science should never answer to money. And for many years that belief held true." Then she detailed what she found. Financial trails that looped back to shell companies, trial results that had been altered, internal warnings that were ignored, and hundreds of decisions that had affected billions of lives. She spoke calmly, but every word landed like a thunderclap. She didn't just explain Victor's crimes, she made the tribunal understand how he'd manipulated systems, people, and narratives to reshape the truth in favor of profit. The prosecution presented documents Lena had helped uncover. Keanu's security contacts had authenticated several of them. Whistleblower testimonies from other countries aligned with her account. The web Victor had spun began to unravel in full view of the world. People watched from every continent. Health workers held group viewings in hospitals. Former patients, researchers, and even students followed each update. Social media trended daily with the latest revelations. Lena's courage had become more than personal. It was now a global symbol of resistance. And still, each day Keanu sat in the same seat, never speaking, always watching. As the trial progressed, Victor finally took the stand. His once pristine appearance had faded. His expression flickered between arrogance and desperation. He denied everything at first, claimed Lena had falsified the documents, that she was emotionally unstable, that the evidence was circumstantial. But the world had already heard Lena speak. They had seen her eyes, her poise, her quiet fire. And now they saw him unravel. The prosecution dismantled every lie with cold precision. Bank records, email trails, testimonies from former assistants who feared retaliation but had come forward after seeing Lena's courage. Victor's empire was collapsing piece by piece. On the 12th day, one of the judges asked Lena a final question. "Dr. Santos, after everything that has happened, being silenced, hunted, painted as unstable, why didn't you run forever?" Lena paused. Her voice didn't shake. "Because someone gave me his jacket in the rain. He didn't know who I was. He didn't need to. He just saw I was cold. And in that moment, I remembered I wasn't powerless. I was still human. And that meant I still had a choice." The courtroom went silent. From the front row, Keanu closed his eyes, not in grief or relief, but in quiet honor. Lena had not only survived, she had spoken a truth so loud it crossed borders. When the tribunal delivered its verdict, the statement was read slowly and deliberately. Guilty on all count? Victor Helm was sentenced to 30 years without parole in an international prison. Several executives involved in the conspiracy faced their own charges. A reform committee was created under the oversight of the United Nations to prevent future manipulation of health data and policy. But perhaps the most powerful moment came not in court, but outside it. As Lena walked down the steps after the final day, applause erupted from the crowd. Not from politicians or journalists, but from ordinary people. Nurses, scientists, teachers, mothers holding children. They had followed her journey and now they stood in recognition. She stopped halfway down the stairs. Keanu joined her side, hand in his coat pocket. A reporter yelled a question. "Do you think love helped win this case?" Keanu didn't answer directly. He turned to Lena and asked softly, "Lunch?" She smiled. "You're buying." The cameras caught it all, but for once, the footage wasn't about scandal, power, or tragedy. It was about something else entirely. A woman who told the truth, a man who believed her, and a world that finally chose to listen. That night, editorials ran headlines like, "Truth, Dignity, and the Napkin That Changed Everything." From bus stop to world stage, Lena Santos redefines justice. Keanu Reeves and the Kindness Revolution. But Lena didn't read them. She and Keanu sat at a small outdoor cafe in Amsterdam, quietly sharing soup and bread. No cameras, no guards, just two people who had once been strangers under the rain. And for the first time in months, Lena let herself breathe. Not as a fugitive, or a witness, or a survivor, but as someone who had been broken and rebuilt. The house was quiet when they returned. After weeks of chaos, media storms, and courtroom testimonies, the calmness felt surreal. The garden outside Keanu's home was blooming from the early spring sun. Hummingbirds hovered over lavender. A breeze drifted through the window, carrying the scent of citrus and rosemary. Lena stepped inside and paused. Everything looked as they had left it. Untouched, still, familiar. She walked toward the guest house slowly, her hand brushing against the wooden rail of the porch. She hadn't stayed there in days, not since flying out for the trial. She opened the door and stepped inside. Dust floated in a shaft of sunlight cutting across the room. Her jacket still hung on the back of the chair. The folded blankets remained by the small couch. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon from the tea Keanu used to brew every evening. Lena sat on the edge of the bed and opened the drawer of the nightstand. Inside, beneath a book of poems she had forgotten she brought, was a folded piece of paper. Her fingers froze. She remembered it instantly. The letter, the one she had written on the night she first arrived, the night he offered her shelter. Back then, she didn't think she'd survive the week. She'd been hunted, humiliated, unsure if she'd ever speak freely again. That night, after Keanu had made her pasta and left her by the fire with extra blankets, she had found a pen and scrap paper and started writing. She didn't know why. Maybe it was to ground herself. Or maybe it was a farewell she wasn't sure she'd ever get to give. She opened it now. The ink had faded slightly, but her handwriting remained steady. She read it silently at first, eyes moving slowly over each word. Her heart beat faster with every line. That version of herself, the broken, exhausted version, was still somewhere inside her, but now layered beneath a voice that had spoken truth to the world. Then she stood, walked to the main house, and found Keanu in the kitchen making coffee. He looked up with his usual, gentle smile. "You okay?" he asked. She held up the letter. "I wrote this a while ago. I never gave it to you." He turned off the stove and nodded once, then gestured toward the living room. They sat on the old leather couch, knees turned slightly toward each other. Lena handed him the paper. His hands moved slowly, carefully unfolding it. She could see his fingers tremble slightly, not from fear, but reverence. She asked, "Can I read it to you?" He nodded. She began, voice soft but sure. "To the man who offered his jacket to a stranger. Tonight, I sat by a fire in a home I don't know, wearing someone else's kindness. I'm not sure you'll ever know what that meant. You didn't ask for anything. You didn't judge. You just saw I was cold, and for the first time in days, I didn't feel invisible. I don't know who you are, but you reminded me of who I am. Maybe I'll never get to say this to your face, but I want to write it anyway. Thank you. For the warmth, for the silence, for being human when the world had forgotten how. Lena." When she finished reading, the room was still. Keanu didn't speak for a long time. He just looked at her, eyes shining with something quiet and deep. "Thank you for letting me see that," he said finally. She nodded, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "I meant every word." He folded the letter again, slower this time, like he was placing something sacred back into time. Keanu placed the folded letter on the coffee table between them, but his gaze didn't leave her face. He could feel the weight of the words still hanging in the air, lingering like the scent of rain on pavement. It wasn't just a letter. It was a moment sealed in ink, a raw fragment of her heart she had quietly carried all this time, and now, by sharing it, she had given him something that felt far deeper than any confession or explanation. Lena leaned back on the couch, her shoulders easing into the cushion like she hadn't done in days. She had faced governments, journalists, and betrayals. Yet reading that letter out loud to Keanu had made her hands shake more than any courtroom testimony. Vulnerability had a different kind of gravity. It asked you to trust not in systems, but in... For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. The clock ticked in the corner. A wind chime rang faintly outside. Lena glanced at Keanu. "I almost threw that letter away the next morning," she admitted. "I was ashamed of how desperate I sounded, of how soft I had become." He gave a faint smile. "But soft didn't break you, it carried you." She exhaled slowly, her eyes welling up. "I think I needed to remember that." Keanu stood up and walked over to the kitchen. He returned moments later with 2 cups of tea, one hand lightly brushing hers as he set hers down. "You reminded me too," he said, "that sometimes people show up for each other when it matters most, even if they don't know why." Lena looked down at the tea, then back at the letter. "Do you think fate is real?" she asked quietly. "I think moments are real," he replied, "and what we choose to do with them, that's the part that makes all the difference." Outside, the light was beginning to shift. The soft gold of the afternoon had turned richer, deeper, casting long shadows across the garden. Lena stood and walked to the window. Her reflection hovered faintly in the glass, layered with the movement of leaves beyond. She saw herself clearly for the first time in a long while, not as a fugitive, not as a director, but simply as someone who had survived something unspeakable and chose to live anyway. She turned back to Keanu, her expression changed. "I want to stay a little longer, not just here," she said, touching her chest, "but in this version of me." He nodded. "Then stay." The two of them moved to the porch. The cushions on the old bench were still slightly sun-warmed. They sat close, watching the horizon melt into the city skyline. It wasn't romantic in the traditional sense. There were no declarations, no longing glances. But the quiet between them held something far stronger. A respect earned, a connection unforced, a knowing that didn't need to be labeled. Lena reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the pen she had used that first night to write the letter. "I'm keeping this," she said, twirling it between her fingers. "Not as a souvenir, as a reminder." Keanu looked at her with quiet understanding. Of what? That the smallest act, a jacket in the rain, can echo further than you'll ever know. She didn't need him to respond. His presence beside her, steady as the earth beneath her feet, was answer enough. A fine drizzle floated through the Los Angeles air, soft and steady like a whispered memory. The same narrow street, the same flickering street lamp above the cracked sidewalk. A year had passed, but the bus stop looked untouched by time. The metal bench still groaned slightly underweight. The shelter still bore faded stickers from protests long gone. But tonight, the bus stop was not just a place, it was a memory waiting to be revisited. Lena pulled her coat tighter, though it wasn't from the cold. She wore Keanu's old jacket again, this time not because she was shivering, but because it meant something. The same jacket he had wrapped around her shoulders without hesitation that night when she was lost, hunted, and alone. Now the sleeves fit her better, not physically, but emotionally. She had grown into this version of herself. Keanu walked quietly beside her, his hands tucked into his own pockets. They didn't speak much on the drive over. They didn't need to. Some silences between them held more meaning than any words could. As they reached the bench, he nodded slightly, and they both sat down. The street lamp cast a warm cone of light around them. Raindrops tapped gently on the metal roof above, like nature keeping rhythm with their breath. Lena looked around, taking it all in. "It's smaller than I remember," she said softly. Keanu smiled. "That's what happens when you survive something. The places stay the same. We just outgrow the fear we carried there." She rested her head against his shoulder. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't stopped that night?" He was quiet for a moment. "All the time, and I still don't know why I did." Lena turned to him. "You gave me more than your jacket. You gave me a chance to remember who I was, before all the fear. And you reminded me," he said, "that sometimes being kind isn't about timing or recognition. It's about instinct. You looked like someone who needed a moment of grace." She smiled, closing her eyes for a second. "I did. More than you'll ever know." They sat like that for a long time, hand in hand, the soft hum of a distant bus engine cutting through the quiet. Lena noticed a young man standing near the edge of the stop, trying to keep dry under the shelter's small overhang. He wore a thin hoodie soaked through. His shoes were tattered. He kept glancing over at them, then away, like he didn't want to intrude. Lena watched him for a moment. Something stirred inside her. Something she hadn't felt since that night. A memory of helplessness, of cold, of pretending not to need help when you desperately did. She stood up slowly, the old jacket still wrapped around her. She walked over to the young man without a word. He looked up, startled. Lena simply smiled, slid the jacket from her shoulders, and handed it to him. He stared at it. "I can't take this," he said. "He kept me warm once," she replied. "Now it's your turn." The young man's eyes softened. He took it with both hands, nodding. "Thank you." Lena walked back to the bench, her arms bare now, but her heart full. Keanu watched her with quiet pride as she sat down beside him again. "Looks like kindness runs in the family now," he said with a smile. Lena leaned into Keanu's shoulder as they watched the young man disappear down the street, his pace slower now, like he no longer needed to run from the cold. The jacket, oversized on him, flapped gently in the wind as he vanished around the corner. The moment was quiet, but it echoed with something far louder than words. The memory of mercy passed on. "I didn't realize how heavy it was," Lena whispered. Keanu tilted his head slightly. "The jacket? No. The fear. The shame. That night, I didn't even know how to ask for help. I just stood there, hoping someone would see me." "You did." He let out a soft breath. "And you saw me too, later. More than most people ever have." They sat for a while, the wet pavement glowing under the lamplight. Cars passed now and then, their headlights cutting brief arcs of brightness through the mist. The city never truly slept, but here, on this quiet stretch of road, time felt suspended. "It feels like we returned to the beginning," Lena said. Keanu gave a thoughtful nod. "But we're different now. You're not the same woman who stood trembling in the rain. And I'm not just some guy with a jacket and good timing. You were never just that." He smiled. "And you were never just a stranger." Soft wind swept through the trees, lining the sidewalk. Lena pulled her knees close, wrapping her arms around them. She looked at the sky. Gray. Endless. Quiet. "I used to think my life had to follow a perfect blueprint. Career, purpose, duty. I lost myself in expectations. Then I lost everything else." Keanu turned to her. "And what do you believe now?" "And connection matters more than control. That healing starts with honesty. That the people we least expect can become the people we need most." A silence stretched between them, rich with unspoken understanding. In that stillness, Lena reached into her pocket and pulled out a small folded paper. It was weathered, like it had been carried and unfolded too many times. She handed it to Keanu. He opened it slowly and began to read. The letter wasn't long, but the words were raw and real. "I don't know who you are. But tonight, in the rain, you reminded me who I am. I had forgotten. That I was someone worth saving. That I mattered. That there's still humanity in this world, even when it feels like everything's broken. If you never see this, that's okay. I just needed to say thank you. You didn't know me, but somehow you saw me." Keanu folded the paper carefully, his eyes glassy but steady. "When did you write this?" "That night, back at the motel. I meant to send it, but I didn't know how, or if I should." He held the letter to his chest for a moment. "You just did." The rain began to ease, the drizzle thinning into silence. Lena looked down at her hands. They weren't shaking anymore. She felt steady, rooted, like this moment was no longer about surviving, but about choosing to live. "Do you regret any of it?" she asked softly. Keanu looked around, then back at her. "Not a single part." She smiled. "Me neither." And as the bus finally pulled around the corner, empty and humming, neither of them stood. They just watched it go by. They didn't need to leave anymore. They were already exactly where they were meant to be. The glass corridors of the New World Health Organization Mental Health Innovation Wing glowed with soft natural light, filtering through skylights designed to bring calm. It was early morning in Geneva, and the wing wasn't open to the public yet, but Keanu and Lena were given special access. The air was quiet, almost sacred, filled with the kind of silence that comes not from emptiness, but from purpose. Lena paused before a polished steel plaque affixed to the entrance. Her name was etched into it with clean, deliberate lettering. It read, "The Dr. Lena Santos Mental Health Innovation Wing. Born from one act of kindness." She stood there for a long time. Keanu watched her, not saying a word. Her hand rose and gently traced the outline of the words, as if trying to feel the truth of it all. Behind them, technicians walked the halls, preparing for the wing's formal dedication. But here, in this moment, it was just the two of them and the echo of everything they'd survived. "It doesn't feel real," Lena whispered. "It is," Keanu replied. "You made it through the fire. Now you're helping others find their way out of theirs." She turned to look at him. "We did it. Together," he nodded. "But only because you chose to fight. Even when the world doubted you, even when they tried to erase your name, your voice, your mind, you kept going." She exhaled deeply, as if letting go of the last thread of doubt she had been carrying. Inside the wing, they passed rooms designed not with sterile precision but with warmth. Soft chairs, circular seating, open windows, and calming art installations. One wall was covered with testimonials from survivors of psychological trauma. Another displayed photos from around the world, children smiling in recovery centers, elders sharing stories during support groups. Every photo captured the resilience of the human spirit. "This doesn't look like a clinic," Keanu said. "It's not meant to," Lena replied. "It's meant to feel like safety, like sanctuary. The kind I needed that night, the kind too many never find." Keanu stopped at a doorway framed by carved wood. Inside was a circular room lined with books, journals, and meditation cushions. At the center was a fountain shaped like a spiral, water flowing in slow, rhythmic pulses. It made a gentle sound, almost like breathing. "What's this room for?" he asked. "Silence," Lena said. "Not the kind that hides pain, the kind that listens to it." They stood quietly, letting the rhythm of the water fill the space. Outside the window, snow began to fall over Geneva's rooftops. It wasn't loud or dramatic, just soft, persistent. A quiet reminder that even the coldest seasons bring beauty. Lena smiled. "Funny, isn't it?" "What is?" "It all began because you offered a jacket." Keanu gave a soft laugh. "I didn't know you were the Director General of WHO. And I didn't know you were the kind of man who shows up when no one's watching." He looked around. "Seems like it worked out." "It did more than that," she said. "It reminded me that power isn't what saves people. Presence does. Courage does. And sometimes a warm meal and a kind word change everything." They continued walking, hand in hand, down the polished corridor. Each step echoed slightly, soft and steady, as if the building itself was holding its breath. Lena paused at a small corner where a glass display case held something unexpected. Her old ID badge, warped and cracked from her escape. Next to it, neatly folded, was Keanu's jacket. A simple card read, "Sometimes the smallest gesture becomes the strongest shield." Lena's eyes filled with tears. "I never thought anyone would believe me again," she whispered. Keanu stood beside her, his voice quiet but certain. "The truth always finds its way, and sometimes people just need someone to walk with them until it does." She nodded, wiping her eyes gently. They moved into the central chamber, where a dome of light bathed a stone circle in the middle of the floor. Inscribed in several languages was a single phrase: "Human dignity begins with being seen." Visitors would pass this circle daily, whether staff or patients or world leaders. But today, it was Lena and Keanu who stood at its center, reflecting on everything it had taken to arrive here. Betrayal, escape, fear, kindness, love, courage. Each chapter woven together, none more important than the moment she was just a cold woman at a bus stop, and he was a stranger who simply stopped to care. Lena turned to him. "What happens now?" He smiled. "Whatever you're ready for." A moment passed between them, deeper than words. Then Lena reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded page. It was the original letter she had written on that rainy night. The one she had copied and rewritten, but never discarded. She opened it again and read aloud. "I don't know who you are, but today you reminded me of who I am. I don't need you to fix anything. I just needed someone to see me, and you did. And that is why I'm still breathing." Her voice trembled on the last sentence. She handed the paper to Keanu, and he folded it gently, slipping it into his pocket without a word. They walked outside the facility as snow continued falling in lazy spirals. Nearby, a group of young counselors were clearing benches and setting up lanterns for the wing's grand opening that evening. One of them looked over, then did a double take. "Is that?" Lena smiled, gave a small wave, then leaned into Keanu's side. In that quiet, simple moment, something shifted, not just in her, but in the people who would one day hear her story. It wasn't about global headlines anymore. It wasn't about public redemption or institutional change. It was about showing up when it mattered. For someone else, for yourself, for no reason other than it was the right thing to do. Somewhere in the distance, a bus hissed to a stop. A woman stepped off, holding a toddler wrapped in a blanket. She looked around, lost and anxious. Lena watched her, then gently stepped forward and offered her gloves. That was how it continued. One act, then another, not for recognition, but because kindness doesn't end, it echoes. Soft music played faintly through outdoor speakers. A cello and a piano, weaving in and out. The kind of melody that doesn't beg for attention, but lingers in your chest long after it ends. Now it's your turn. Have you ever received help from a stranger when you needed it most? Share your story in the comments. And tell us, what kind of story would you love to see Keanu in next?